This Relink book that I keep referencing is basically your guidebook to actually getting your license in North Carolina. It goes into way more detail than what that video just did. It talks about the basic criteria. Now, folks, the criteria for this class, the criteria for getting your license, you ready for this? 18, sane, and sober. And when we're talking about this class, I say 2 out of 3 ain't bad, you know what I'm saying? But that is the requirements to get your license. So as you start looking here, I'm not going to read this book to you. Number one, because it's about to change. But number two, because there's not, there's more information than what I need to go over right now. But I'm going to use this as an opportunity to kind of start teaching you some material. Let me zoom in a little bit here. If you look at the table of contents in the real estate licensing book, that's the introduction. Talks about license categories and status levels, and that's one of the first things we're going to start learning. So I'm going to give you just a snippet of it, and then we're going to talk about that tonight, for the rest of class in a moment. Kind of outlines the application process, gives you an overview, talks about time frames, some special considerations. So let me scroll down here and just start touching on some things. First and foremost, I'm going to point out another thing that makes this class so difficult. I already told you that there's a lot of names, terminologies, and verbiages that you've probably learned that are what I like to call a misnomer. They're not used correctly. They're used inappropriately. They're not right. And so let me ask you a question, folks. What do people call the people you are trying to become? The people that help people buy and sell houses. What do people call them? What's the name for them?
Real estate realtor.
Realtor. What'd you say, Justin?
A real estate agent.
A real estate agent?
Sales agent.
Sales agent?
I've heard real estate broker.
Real estate broker. There we go. Folks, all of those are absolutely true. Now here's the trick. They're not the same thing. Every single time I say that, everybody has like a brief moment of panic. They're like, wait a second, am I in the right class? Is this where I'm supposed to be? I want to be a real estate agent. Am I going to be a real estate agent after this? Let me explain. When you get your license after this class, after passing the state licensing exam, you are what we call a real estate broker. We also will refer to you as a licensee, someone with a broker's license. You are a real estate agent, not because you have a broker's license solely. It is because you represent other people. That's what the word agent means. Representing somebody else, looking after somebody else's interests. We're going to talk a lot about that in this class. And then Realtor is the other name y'all dropped on me. Well, folks, Realtor is a trade organization. You have to join a specific organization called the National Association of Realtors to be called a Realtor. So here's a very powerful statement. Not all brokers are realtors, but all realtors are brokers. So do you see the nuances there with these different terminologies? Yeah, the general public uses them interchangeably, but from a testable point of view, from a legal point of view, they all mean something different. It's just that you happen to be all three in a lot of instances. Does that make sense for everybody? Now I'm going to dive some more into the terminology, but I owe you another break. So, we are currently looking at the Relink book, stands for Real Estate Licensing in North Carolina. Think of it like the guidebook to getting a license. It just outlines the process, the things you need to do. And so before we get into the actual process, because this comes first in the book, this is an opportunity for you to get one of the first really important lessons, okay? Now, of course, this is not the full in-depth version. This is kind of an introductory version to some important terminology. And so I clarified before we went on break the difference between the term realtor, real estate broker, and agent. Now, I also want to just take it a step further and tell you that broker is actually not a real estate person in any way, shape, or form. Folks, what does the word broker mean? Let me ask you this. You ever heard of brokers other than real estate brokers?
Yeah, they're the person that's managing, they're like the in-between.
The in-between. That's exactly what they are. And insurance brokers, stock brokers, mortgage brokers, real estate brokers. Okay, you've heard this term broker before used in a lot of different ways. And so, as Kirsten said, folks, they are an in-between. Okay, they are somebody who brings together two parties. And so that's why we are called real estate brokers. We are brokering a deal. Somebody who wants to buy real estate and somebody who wants to sell real estate. We're not the ones buying and selling it. We are facilitating this deal between the buyer and the seller. That makes us a real estate broker. Sometimes we're facilitating deals between lessor and lessee. That makes us a real estate broker. And so broker is just a general terminology of somebody who brings together two parties. If I was to say stockbroker, that brings together people who want to sell stock options and people who want to buy stock options. If I was to say mortgage broker, that brings together lenders who want to lend money and borrowers who want to borrow money. Mortgage brokers, insurance brokers, they all do the same thing. They're bringing together the parties for these deals. And so when you get your license in North Carolina, you are issued a real estate broker's license. Now, for the vast majority of this class, we will just call it a broker's license. So here's another important lesson. In North Carolina, we are what we call a broker-only state. Every single person who does real estate with a license in North Carolina is a broker, but there are different statuses for your broker's license. The reason why this is significant is because in some states they have what's called a salesperson. Some of you dropped that name whenever I said, what are we called? So for all intents and purposes, a salesperson from a national point of view is very similar to what we call a provisional broker in North Carolina. You see this word right here. Provisional broker. And so when you get your license, it is issued on what we call provisional status. Let me tell you the difference though. In states with salespersons, they can be a salesperson forever. It's basically somebody who has to have supervision. They can't operate independently as a salesperson. So they would have what's called an employing broker, a managing broker, or something like that in those states. In North Carolina, we don't have salespersons, we have provisional brokers. And so a provisional broker cannot operate independently. They have to have supervision. So every single one of you who gets your license through this class will get your license issued on provisional status. And in order to go out and actually sell houses, you have to affiliate with what we call in North Carolina a broker in charge. And that broker in charge provides supervision for you to make sure you don't screw up, and then you can actually go out and use your license. So a couple different terminologies will come into play later, but I'm just going to leave it at that right now. So you cannot stay a provisional broker in North Carolina. It's not allowed. You can only do it for a period of time. It's basically the training wheels version of real estate. We give you some training wheels. We give you a period of time to learn how to ride. And at a certain point, we say, training wheels are gone. You either can ride or you can't ride. And so what you have to do to move from a provisional broker to a full broker, unfortunately, folks, is more education. I hate to break it to you. This isn't it. This is the education you need to get your license. After you get your license, you will have to take what is called post-licensing courses. There are 3 of them, and they are 30 hours each, for a total of 90 hours. You have 18 months in the state of North Carolina to get those classes knocked out, a year and a half. That is your training wheel period as a provisional broker. Now remember what I said, you can make $2 million your first year. There is nothing limiting the amount of sales you can do as a provisional broker. But until you move to a full broker, you have to have a broker in charge to supervise you. Cannot operate independently as a PB. Is this making sense so far? Now, I just said PB. Understand that sometimes we use abbreviations. In real estate, we love acronyms and abbreviations. So when I say PB, I mean a provisional broker. Stephanie's like, yep, acronyms and abbreviations every time. A lot of them. So let me tell you another reason why this class is so stinking confusing. You ready for this? We have a slew of what I like to call AKAs, also known as this. Okay? So when I say broker in North Carolina, we also call that a full broker. We also call that a non-provisional broker. Those three names mean the exact same thing on the test, on the North Carolina portion. Broker, full broker, and non-provisional broker. So if you ever read that word non, you need to say it in your head as not. Because one of the biggest mistakes students make on a test is they see the word non-provisional and they answer the question like the person's provisional. But they're not. Non-provisional is not provisional. It's the same as a full broker. And if you are answering a question versus what a provisional broker can do and what a full broker can do, those are very different answers to the questions. Everybody following along here? So verbiage is extremely important. Knowing the different names that something can be called is extremely important. Now, this is not me teaching this section. This is an introduction to the concept, okay? Don't panic. You don't need to be experts, just as long as you're, like, if it doesn't sound like I'm speaking in tongues, then you're probably okay. All right? So the next status up after broker is a status that you don't ever have to go to. If you want to play real estate in North Carolina, you have to at least be a full broker at some point. But what we call a BIC, or broker in charge, is another tier up, where you could basically now supervise other people. And so that's not something that you can just do willy-nilly. Just to give you a little bit of insight, you need 2 years of full-time brokerage experience before you could ever become a BIC, okay, a broker in charge in North Carolina. So 2 years of full-time experience within the past 5 years. You have to be an active broker. You have to be a full broker. And there is, of course, some additional education. Now, I keep telling you, the final exam is bifurcated. There's a national portion and a state portion. You will not see the term broker in charge on the national portion. You will see the term employing broker, managing broker, or just broker. Verbiage is going to be one of the hardest things to differentiate because there is this two different parts of this, these two pieces of the puzzle. And so you have to always think about it. The good thing is, because the exam is separated, you can just tell yourself what you should be thinking. If you're on the national portion, you're going to see salesperson, you're going to see broker, employing broker, or something like that. If you're on the state portion, you're going to see all these terminologies I'm telling you. Provisional broker, full broker, non-provisional, BIC eligible, all these different things. Now, I scrolled over it, but BIC eligible just means broker in charge eligible. So it's the same criteria as being a BIC. I'll tell you the difference really briefly. A BIC eligible broker is sitting at the ready to oversee somebody. A BIC is actively overseeing somebody, whether that be themselves, whether that be a firm, whether that be something like that. It's the same criteria to get those statuses, and neither one of them is ever required unless you want to operate independently or run a firm or manage other people. And we're going to get more into this later. So one of the big things that you have to understand, folks, is that a license is not required for everything. There are very specific times that a license is required. Let me ask you folks a question. None of you have a broker's license in the fine state of North Kakalaki right now. So here's my question. If you own a home, can you sell it without a license in North Carolina?
Yes.
Yeah. We in the business, we call that a FSBO, folks. Remember how I said we love our acronyms? FSBO, for sale by owner. FSBO. You do not need a license to sell your own property. Well, if you own rental properties, can you manage them without a license?
Yes, because they're my properties, right?
Yes, because they're your properties. You're absolutely right. Folks, you can manage your own personally owned properties without a license. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to a very testable concept. Yet again, this is not me teaching it. This is laying some groundwork, okay? In North Carolina, there are very specific things that trigger the need for a license. There are slides that I will show you, so please don't be like frantically taking notes. You're like, oh my God, I'm never going to get this information because I didn't write them down. The way that we like to articulate this is another acronym. LL Beans. Just like the clothing store, but with an S. You ever heard of the company LL Bean? Backpacks, clothes, all these different things, okay? It's just like that, but with an S on the end. And so what that stands for is anytime that somebody lists, leases, buys, auction. I did it in a different order than I normally do. List, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, sell. I was trying to make it, like a little more rhythmic, but I ended up screwing off my rhythm. List, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, sell. Okay, now I told you there's going to be a slide for that. Don't panic if you didn't write that down. So anytime that you are doing these things, offering to do these things, or referring somebody to do these things, and it deals with, you ready for this? Real estate, or more specifically, real property for others, and you're getting paid for compensation. That's when a license is required. So think about it. You just told me you didn't need a license, a broker's license in North Carolina to sell your own house. Why? It's not for others. If any of those three criteria are missing, you don't need a license. It's real estate, right? It's real property. You're going to make money because you're selling your house, but it's not for others. Don't need a license. Managing your property, you're going to make money. It's real estate. It's not for others. Now let me throw a kicker in here. Folks, could you manage your grandmother's real estate because you love your grandma without a license?
Yes, because I'm not getting paid, right?
Correct. Folks, it is very specific. All three have to be present for a license to be required in the state of North Carolina. Your grandmama's house is real property. Your grandmama is somebody other than yourself, but if you're doing it out of the kindness of your heart because you love your sweet, sweet Nana, you're not being compensated. No license is needed. Now listen, if Nana says, well, you're just so nice helping your Nana out, you and your friends can stay at the beach house for a week. Now we got a problem. Because can we all agree that staying at a beach house is something of value?
Yeah.
Now you would need a license to do that legally. If you stayed in Nana's beach house in exchange for managing her property, you just did a legal brokerage activity. The whole point of you going through this class and getting a license is so you can facilitate deals, you can do things, and you can get paid for them legally. But it is just as important on your test to know when a license isn't required as it is to know when a license is required. So there's going to be lots of slides in regard to this. I'm just trying to get your minds right for kind of what you're delving into here as I throw out some of the verbiage in this Relink book. Everybody still okay? Nobody's panicking yet. So a license is required to be compensated legally for doing brokerage activity. Well, let me introduce something called a firm license. A firm license is something that an entity would have, okay? A corporation, a partnership, an LLC. You folks ever heard of the term or the name Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax? Those are all brokerage firms. Well, folks, can we all agree that these brokerage firms are doing real estate activities and they're getting paid for it? Yeah. So they need a license. So a people like you fine folks gets a broker's license. An entity would get what's called a firm license. A fictitious company cannot do real estate brokerage either without being licensed. Now, of course, you all understand that companies are fictitious. They exist because they say we exist, or because we say they exist. It's paperwork that says it's a thing. So you all understand that Coldwell Banker isn't a person, right? They can't sit in my classroom. So if you create an entity and you operate an entity that does real estate, an individual broker that we call a qualifying broker is the person who has the right to get this firm license for an entity. And we're going to talk more about that down the road. So when I say firm license, it is a license for a thing, a business. When I say broker's license, that is a license for a people. Both would need a license to get paid for real estate legally. Everybody still cool? The next one on the list is, it's going to be testable to a very, very small degree. And so I'm just going to really quickly mention it because it's not really going to pertain to any of you outside of the test. This last one is a special category in North Carolina called an LNCL, Limited Non-Resident Commercial License. And so what this is a special category that says, okay, well, if you are actively licensed in another state and you follow a couple criteria, you could potentially come into North Carolina, jump through some hoops, and get a temporary license to transact commercial brokerage only. And we'll talk more about that later. Just understand that that is kind of its own standalone category in North Carolina. It's not as testable, but you could see it on your test. It's called a LNCL, Limited Non-Resident Commercial License. So now that I've given you kind of your introduction to the first lesson of the night, let me finish talking about the application process. This book will tell you everything you need to know about your application. As I said, you are in a weird time because this book, a brand new version of this, will be rolled out in like a week and a half. The process will be the same, but you will see where the big differences are going to come in just a second. What you got, Jacob?
So I wanted to ask, is this information that you're telling us about how we get, how we go about getting our broker licenses, is this something that we obviously just need to know because that's what we're doing, or is this something that is going to also be on the test?
Everything that I just said is on the test. Everything that I just said. Everything that I'm about to get into now, not necessarily, right? Although I'm not going to promise that they won't have test questions about, the legal criteria to apply for a license. With them adding 20 more North Carolina portion questions, they could add some more into the mix. But everything I just told you is very testable, and we're going to get into it in a lot more detail. Everything that I'm about to say is more about the process.
No, I knew that all the LLB and stuff was going to obviously be on the test.
Yeah, what I'm about to say.
The stuff from the real estate licensing in North Carolina book. If like that right there, like the process of us getting our license, the steps to it, if like that's something that we just need to know. If that's
No, like everything that I'm about to talk about right now is not going to be testable per se, but there are some blips in here that are testable, but this is not really a study resource so much as it is just a guide to getting your license, because everything that I'm going to teach you will exist somewhere outside of this book also. Good question. So basic criteria, I told you 18, sane and sober. More specifically, you need to be 18, have to be a U.S. citizen, non-citizen national, have a social security number or whatever. Satisfy one of the education qualifications below. Folks, this is your education qualification that you're currently sitting in. There are other options, but for most of you that doesn't pertain. File a complete application and fee. Pass the 2-part real estate license exam and satisfy the commission that the applicant possesses the requisite character for licensure. Hang tight, I'm going to talk more about that piece. So the education qualifications, there are 4 options, and for most people it is this one. Complete the 75-hour minimum course which you are all currently attending. Some of the things that could allow you to avoid taking this class is being an attorney in the state of North Carolina. Being licensed in a different state could potentially get you out of this class, although our test is very, very difficult, so it is sometimes still advised to go through it to make sure you learn on North Carolina stuff. So for you, this is the education requirement. So then when you get into the next little piece, it starts talking about, equivalents and things in other states. But here's the actual application process. I showed you where to find the actual application on the Real Estate Commission's website. If you go to licensing and apply for a broker's license, ncrec.gov is the website. And so you will start your license application right here. I don't think that link's going to change, but I'm just saying you probably don't need to do it yet until I get a little more information about some of the changes coming in the next week or so. So let me get into some of the information in more detail that I've told you. You've got to pass this class to get your education requirement, and that includes passing my class exam. When you pass this class, that gives you a completion certificate, which gives you my instructor code, which allows you to finish your application with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. When you complete your application, you will get what's called exam eligibility. And then you will go on to take the state licensing exam. Now, this is where this information is not entirely accurate anymore. For example, right now, you've got an application fee of $100, and you've got the testing fee of $56. if I remember correctly, and hold on, I might have my notes right here, because we just had a meeting with the Real Estate Commission a couple days ago. Let me see. I didn't write it down. If I remember correctly, it's actually going down a little bit, not a lot. So I think the examination fee is moving from 56 to like 46. Don't quote me on that, but it is going down just a hair. Now here's the important thing to understand. The way that this sits right now, and I can't really swear one way or another until that time comes, when you go and take your state licensing exam, you pay the $100 application fee, the $56 testing fee. There's two parts to the exam. And if you fail either portion, you could only have to retake the portion you failed, but regardless, you still have to pay the $156 every single time. That number does not go down. So if you take both portions and pass it, yay you, you're done. If you take both portions and fail one, you only have to retake the one you failed, but every single time you retake the test, it's the same price. And for the new one, it's going to be like $146 or whatever that is, but it's still a lot of money, folks. You do not want to go unless you are ready and prepared for that test. Now, furthermore, I want to point out something to you. Okay, this is very important. Listen to me. Let me preface this with, I am going to do absolutely everything that I can to prepare you folks to pass this exam with flying colors. But you're going to have to work hard on your end too. Now that I've let you know that I'm here for you, no matter what you need to help prepare you, here's the word of warning. I told you that my pass rates are currently sitting at right at 90%, 89%, which is pretty stinking good. And that pass rate means that the people who leave my class, 90% pass their exam on their first try. But they only quantify this within 30 days of passing my class. So if you leave my class and go take the exam a week later and you fail it, either portion, it counts as a fail for me. And it brings my numbers down. And listen, I am a perfectionist, okay? So let me give you the word of caution right now, okay? If you fail one portion, you're not going to have to worry about taking the other portion, because I'm not saying, but you're just going to disappear, okay? Nobody's going to find you, all right? You're just going to fall off the face of this earth, because I get reports when somebody, you're just going to see me outside, right? You're going to be like at home. You're like, oh God, I can't believe I passed the North Carolina side, but I failed the national side. And it's going to be storming outside and something's going to catch your eye and you're going to look out there. It's going to be raining and the lightning's going to flash and you're just going to see me standing in the rain. Just as the lightning flashes, you're just going to see me out there standing and just staring at you. And you're like, oh my God, was that Seth? Oh my God, he's here because I failed that portion of the exam. And then when you turn on your light outside, I'm going to be gone. And it's going to be like the movie Scream. I'm just going to be standing behind you. I'm like, so how'd the exam go? And then nobody will ever hear from you again. Now, for legal purposes, I'm kidding. But folks, here's the thing. Do not take that test if you're not ready. I will do everything I can to help you get ready. So if you're a slacker with a capital S and you barely eked out of my class and you don't have a clue what's on that test and you're not going to pass it, simple ask. Wait till day 31 to take the test and you help me out a lot, because then they don't care. All right? If you're ready, I want you to take it the second you get out of my class and I will help you be ready. But don't do me dirty just because, okay? It wastes your money, it hurts my test scores, and as I said, I'm a perfectionist. I want to make sure my test scores are the bee's knees. So, there you go. Now, let me say something else that's very important for you to understand. And I know a lot of this stuff you're going to forget because I'm already overwhelming you with information, and I've barely even talked about anything testable thus far. When you pass this class, here's the good news. This class is good for 3 years. So let's say that you have PTSD so bad after you pass this class, you're like, I don't want to take that exam. I'm going to just wait a minute. You have up to 3 years from the date of this class completion to take that test. You don't have to do it immediately after. Now, if you want your license, that's the only way to get it. And if you're prepared, take it sooner rather than later so you don't forget the stuff. But this class, when you complete it, is good for 3 years. So a couple other things to be aware of. Right now, if you fail the test, you can only take it every 10 days because they cycle through different versions of the test. I don't know if that will change as this new test rolls out or not. Of course, it goes and talks about the actual online application, the information you need to put in. It's going to verify you. You can, create it and come back later. It talks about the credit card for paying your application fee and everything. Here is where we're going to talk for a minute. Right here. This is important because I can guarantee that this is not going to change. The link may change, the methodology may change, but this is not going to change. Folks, part of this class is getting a background check. And when I say this class, I mean getting your license. You have to contain what is called the requisite character. Folks, you are about to embark on a career where you are helping people invest hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in real estate. If you have embezzled millions from a previous company and you're out on a work release program, you're probably not getting a license. Sweetness, I'm sorry. If you stab somebody 1 or 17,000 times, probably not getting a license. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. These background checks are extremely thorough. And I have had plenty of students come through where things are on their background check that they didn't think was still on there. And so remember when I said, I pointed out a link and I said I'm going to come back to it later. If you're sitting right now in your seat squirming a little bit and like, oh my God, that time I did a breaking and entering at my ex-boyfriend's house, that's still on my record. Am I going to have a problem? Right? If you're thinking that, here's where you go. Under that application, there is what's called a petition for predetermination. It is where you can send off to the commission and you can say, hey, this is on my background. Will I be able to get a license or not? And they're not going to guarantee that you will or won't, but what they're going to say is don't waste your time, or yeah, go through the process and we'll see. So anything that comes up on your background check, anything that would imply to them that you do not have the requisite character, you're going to have a character hearing with the Real Estate Commission before they'll give you your license. Now, don't panic, because I have seen plenty of people still get them. Plenty of people who have DUIs get licenses. One of my past students actually did have a breaking and entering charge on her ex-boyfriend. She told her side of the story and they still gave her her license. So they do still give licenses to people. They do give you the benefit of the doubt, but just be aware that this is a thing. Now, the background check, I typically suggest doing it around halfway through the course. And I'll remind you at that point, but word of caution, they're only good for 6 months. And so if you were to do it too soon and then you failed your test, you would have to do another background check. Now, the more complex your background is, the more it's going to cost, more time it's going to take. So for instance, I had students who got out of a background check for $10. Cost them $10, they had it back in a week because they had very boring lives. For some of you folks, was it Kirsten, lived in 72 different places? Yours might take a little bit longer because they have to look at all the different states and they go back quite a ways. And so some people, it has cost hundreds of dollars for the background check and it has taken over a month. It just depends on how complex. The longest ones are military. If you've lived overseas or in another country, those take the longest. So just keep that in mind. The generalization is I'll probably tell you to start thinking about your background check about halfway through the class. But if you know you got a very complex background, you may want to do it sooner because you cannot take your actual state licensing exam until that comes back. That is part of completing the application process. Now, all the information for the background check is right here in this relink book. And I'm telling you, this will not change. So you have to go to this specific website. You have to go through these resources. This is the phone number. Has nothing to do with me. So be like, Seth, how do I do my background check? I don't know. That was over 8 years ago when I did it. This is all I know. Go through this. Call these people. Talk to these people. Jacob says, considering he's 21 and only has 3 years of background to check into, should be quick. Who knows? Maybe you got some shady things that, from when you were 15, Jacob. You never know. Right? Some people are tried as adults. What you got, Tim?
I think you can go through the commission's website also, right? And there's a link there.
Yeah.
Background check, right?
If I'm not mistaken, there is a link directly in the application. So when you actually start the application process, it will link you to it because that is where you end up at a standstill. You're absolutely right. I think that's correct.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it does go on to talk about the petition for predetermination, this consideration of applicant's character. So just make sure that you kind of read through this if you've got any concerns here. Talks about potential character issues and things that you might have to jump through for this character hearing. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through here. We don't need to go into too much detail, but I just always like to make you aware of it. This is where the rest of this is basically malarkey. I'm going to show you one important thing because you're going to get an identical version of it when the new one rolls out. But this is where it starts talking about the PSI exam, which you will not be taking. It's still going to be bifurcated exam. It's still going to go through this process. It's still going to have this same eligibility period. Folks, I told you this class is good for 3 years. However, when you complete your application, you basically have a 180-day exam eligibility window. If you don't pass both portions of the exam within that 180 days, you just have to go through a new background check and open up the exam eligibility window again. You don't have to retake the class, so you can have as many subsequent 180-day windows, but let's say that you did somehow survive passing only one section and not the other, and you couldn't pass the other within that 180-day window, you wouldn't have to retake both in the new 180-day window. So that's what it's kind of talking about here when you see this exam eligibility period. Here is kind of a sample format of what the questions are going to look like on the state licensing exam. And I don't expect you to be able to answer them yet, but primary body of law governing the relationship between a seller of real estate and the broker with whom the seller lists the property is known as, and it's all multiple choice. Now, of course, the trickier ones are the longer ones, where it's a word problem, but it's actually a math question. Or it's a freaking novel and you've got to figure out what information is useful and what information isn't. Because there are questions like that where we put stuff in there to trick you, to make sure that you can analyze it. So there's one more example right here. Nothing is going to change drastically with the formatting, but it is a different testing provider. Same formatting though. So here is where the magic comes from, okay? And I'm going to tell you why this is important and then understand that this is what's going to be changing significantly in the next week. This is the formula for your state licensing exam. In other words, they tell you how many questions you are tested on based on each individual category. And it will be set up just like this, but what they're doing is they're condensing it to there's only going to be 8 testable categories on the national and 8 testable categories on the state. Right now, it's a little bit more than that, and you can kind of see the grouping. So let me tell you how to read this, because I'm sure it's going to keep a similar structure when the other one comes out. What this is saying is between the basic real estate concept section, the property insurance basic section, the construction section, and basic real estate investment, you get a total of 2 questions on your state licensing exam on the national portion, which means you may get 2 about basic real estate concepts and not a single question on any of these others. You may get 1 on insurance and 1 on basic construction, but neither of these 2. That's how you read this. Here's why this is important, folks. I already told you, you are going to be drinking from 3 fire hoses simultaneously. So when the new one rolls out, we will take time to talk about it in class, but it's probably not going to look too dissimilar, but I want you to notice something. If you start looking at categories like this, brokerage relationship laws and practice, 10 questions out of 80 on the national, 11 questions out of 40 on the state. Agency contract sales and related procedures, 7 and 8. Basic contract law, 13. Real estate financing, 12. What this means is when you look at the categories with the most testability, if you are a very limited on your time kind of person and you have to figure out what you're going to study, folks, do not spend time studying basic real estate concepts. Study financing, study agency, study contract law. Hit the big hitter topics that are going to be the most testable. And so this is why it's actually probably to your benefit that it's moving to a 60 question exam for the state portion. Look right here. The way it sits now, brokerage relationships, 11. Agency contracts, 8. And North Carolina license law and commission rules, 10. Basically, 3 sections made up 75% of the exam. So if you weren't an absolute freaking genius in those 3 sections, you were screwed on the North Carolina state portion. Now that it's 60 questions, it should be a little more evenly spread out through other concepts, which means it's not going to hit you as hard, which means statistically speaking, you have a better likelihood of passing. So Jacob says, so the syllabus and the relink will be changing next week. Our meeting with the Real Estate Commission for all the new materials, I believe, is the 7th. Let me make sure I put that on my calendar. Not the 7th. It is... Yes, the 7th. So I'm hoping that it will not be the start of next week. It will be the end of next week. I should have that meeting on Wednesday morning before our class to hopefully have some discussions with you next Wednesday on kind of the new syllabus and what to expect and all these things. So, but as I said before, don't panic. None of the material is changing. Everything that I'm teaching you still holds true. Everything that I'm going to say is the most testable is still going to be the most testable. Nobody panic. Yeah, and honestly, I would still print out the syllabus as it sits right now. The only thing that they're doing is just moving it around. And so it's going to be grouped into the same testable categories. So if you wanted to see like what the 8 testable categories were, that's the only difference with the new syllabus. But this syllabus is actually flowing the way that I'm going to teach it to you. And it's also saying all the testable concepts. So I would honestly, just for the sake of this class, focus on the current syllabus. I'll give you a copy of the other one, but it's not going to change anything for you.
Okay. So
Yep. Yeah.
that makes sense. And
Yep.
then wait to print out the relink stuff.
Yeah, and you may not even want to print out the relink stuff. This is, when the new one comes out, this is the most significant page right here. Just telling you about the testing categories and the breakdown. Everything else, you can scroll through it. There's no real reason to print it out and waste that paper. Yeah. Folks, that's it in a nutshell. Of course, it goes into some more information on the PSI test. Of course, as I told you, we're switching to Pearson VUE. This is still going to hold true, though. Do be aware that they do have what we call pre-test questions. They will try out questions on the actual licensing exam. And so that's still going to be true on the new exam. So what that means is technically you'll have like 85 and 65, but those won't count towards you and they won't count towards the time. So if you get the questions right or wrong, it doesn't matter. And if you're sitting on those questions staring at them, it will not deduct from your time allotted. They just do it for programming purposes to test out questions to see if they are good questions for future exam versions. Kind of cruel and unusual that they use you as guinea pigs, but I guess what else are they supposed to do, you know? So the rest of this, as I said, talks about the PSI exam. Toss it out. It's gone. Doesn't matter. Doesn't exist. PSI will be long gone before you folks test. Because the earliest any of you could probably take the Pearson VUE exam will be like March 17th. And March 1st is the first day for Pearson VUE exam. So, y'all are going to be guinea pigs for that too. Yay. Yay for being a guinea pig. That's it for the Relink book. Anything that I've freaked you out with thus far? No? I'm not panicking too bad? Okay.
Is it safe to assume that the national portion will be a little bit easier because it seems like the laws and regulations are a little bit more streamlined or national compared to being state specific?
Excellent question. Yes, the national has a tendency to have a higher pass rate historically. Now, of course, we're going to be looking at all new data now that they've changed the testing criteria a little bit. Now, the only word of caution, Josh, because there is this bifurcated exam, is I have heard that Pearson VUE does use some slightly different verbiage more than PSI does. So as I just told you, salesperson and broker, and they're going to tell me this so I can teach it to you at the next meeting with the Real Estate Commission. They're going to basically, I'm going to have to tell you that when you're on the national, you got to think of broker as broker in charge or managing broker. So there's going to be some verbiage things, but otherwise, yeah, national is a universal concept, typically easier, and there's a lot more resources for national. North Carolina is one of the more difficult states to pass the test in because we got a lot of laws and rules, but we'll get you well prepared. Yeah.
Sorry, I just got to share. When I took mine the first time, I actually passed the state and I failed the national, so I had to retake. So,
And it does happen.
it's because of that verbiage. Exactly it. Like they try to trick you, I guess, per se, and you're like, huh? So,
Yeah.
Sharon.
And I'm going to do a really thorough job of explaining certain things to you folks. Whenever it comes through, I'm going to say, listen, this is national, and you need to think of it this way. And then I'll say, this is state. And so you've got to understand that if you're taking the national exam, forget this exists. So I do a very good job of articulating that so you can kind of keep it separate in your brain, okay? So I'm going to make sure that I prepare you all. Yeah. So, a couple more slides to get into tonight and the time we have left. We've already met everybody, and I think y'all are going to be a fantastic bunch. I'm very much looking forward to our time together, and I hope y'all are all looking forward to it as well. Here's where I already kind of alluded to this, but I'm just going to remind you. You are here to pass a test. That's it. I know that there's going to be a lot of, well, what about this? And what if that? And what if this? And what if that? And I'm not trying to be rude, but there are times where I'm just going to nip that in the bud. I'm going to say, nope, we're not going down that route because it's not going to be on the test. As much as I know that you'd love to know what happened if somebody had property this way, but then died, but then they came back to life and then they turned into a zombie, would they still own the property, right? The amount of squirrely rabbit hole things that people get into, stop it, okay? If it's not pertinent to the test, if it's not pertinent to the class, if it's my agent did this, I'm just going to say, nope, we're not going to talk about that. But you can ask me after class if you want. I just do not want to derail anybody on what ifs or what had happened was or any of these fictitious scenarios, okay? Just trying to pass a test. That's the whole point of pre-licensing. As much as it hurts me as an educator to say that, I'm going to teach you how to be the world's best real estate broker after you get your license, not before. You got to crawl before you can walk and walk before you can run, folks. Baby steps. Baby steps. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is different testable levels of material. And so here's just a generalization. All of these are based off of what we call Bloom's taxonomy. You don't really need to know Bloom or the taxonomy. Just understand that there is the easier levels and then the higher end levels. And so if we say something is a level 1 topic, that is just recalling, remembering, having a basic understanding. It's more or less vocabulary. Level 2 is you have to be able to differentiate between a couple things. You have to analyze. And then level 3 is there's going to be a very complex concept and you've got to be able to delve super deep and realize all the nuances within the scenario. So in other words, level 1 is vocab, level 3 is write a book on it. And the hardest topics are all level 3 topics. When we get into things like basic real estate concepts, it's level 1 crap, all right? Oh, you got to know what the word real estate means. You got to know what the word land means. That's just very trivial items. So when you look on the syllabus, let me pull it back up and I'll show you. You'll see throughout level 1 is just recall crap. Level 1, level 1. Level 1, level 3. So that's why I have to just kind of point that out. So, on some of the slides, I have this little icon to indicate that it's more of a level 3. Not always, but I'll be able to tell you, hey, this is really stinking important. So, I told you that I was going to give you some slides that kind of articulated what I already mentioned. The way that this flows is I actually like to give you your first more deeper insight into what I will call license law and commission rules. And so that book that I have, let me just show you this one more time. Not the relink, but the other one that is listed in your materials, the other one that I emailed you, the other one that you can find on the Real Estate Commission's website. It's called the License Law and Commission Rule Book. Now I want to point out something very important here. Let's see, important documents. Folks, this book is a bunch of legal jargon. I want you to know that a bunch of attorneys and old crotchety hateful people wrote this thing. And if you read it from cover to cover, you will hate your life. Some schools, some teachers will say, you need to read this cover to cover. No, don't you dare. And let me tell you why. If you look, there is 3 sections. There is license laws, some are testable. There are commission rules, some are testable. And then there's what we call laws and rules comments. We like to refer to this comment section as the study guide. Basically, it is a deeper dive into some of the laws and rules and a more layman's terminology that you can understand. Because when you read the actual laws and rules, they're very confusing, if we're being completely honest. I'm going to show you a real-world example of this in just a second. But if you look, there's not going to be a single test question about private real estate education providers and continuing education. I mean, there is, because I'm going to talk about continuing education requirements, but you don't need to read that section. There's not going to be a single test question on the real estate education and recovery fund. You see what I'm saying? There's not testable sections, but you have a magic guide. That syllabus that I keep telling you about. Let me show you this. If you look at the table of contents, real estate license law and commission rules. So if you go to page 105, oh, no, it's 105 for that, not this. Here you go. This is why the syllabus is so important, folks. It's going to tell you exactly which laws and rules are testable. It's going to tell you which ones are level 2, which ones are level 1. Do not read that book in its entirety. Only focus on the things that are in the syllabus. Because I promise you, there's not a single discussion on that real estate education recovery fund. Why would you read about it? It's going to jumble you up. Every single testable component from that book is outlined right here. This is what you need to focus on, not the whole book. So if you're going to read anything, read the back section. And I have it in a separate format, but if you look at page 106 of the License on Commission Rule book, that's the comment section. And this is where you can see information that's very testable. When we get into things like material facts, it talks about the categories, gives some examples. And I'll point this book out more as we go along, okay? So nobody panic. This is not, nothing is ever, we're never done talking about anything, okay? Everything comes full circle. So I'm going to introduce something and then I'll come back to it and come back to it and come back to it. And we start building these layers as things kind of tie into each other. So we've already talked about some of these pieces. We've already talked about the Relink book. I've already kind of walked you through there. I've already talked about the background check, so nobody panic. I've already talked about the 180-day exam eligibility. I already told you that Pearson VUE is your test provider. So here's where I told you about when a license is required in North Carolina. So a real estate license is required in North Carolina if you want to do certain things and get paid for them. And those things are those LO Beans activities. List, lease, buy, exchange, auction, negotiate, sell. And you want to get paid for it legally. If it does not hit all 3 criteria that I told you before and I'm about to give you a visual for, then you don't need a license. So in the examples earlier, we said, well, can you sell your own house without a license? The answer is yes. Can you manage your own property without a license? The answer is yes. Can you help your best friend buy a house without a license? The answer is yes, as long as they're not getting paid. And you've got to look at this in a very black and white point of view, because that's how these test questions are going to be asked. You either do need a license or you don't.
Quick question. I'm sorry. Just to confirm, payment or does it have to be like not currency, but for example, by tax law, right? A gift card, that's considered a. Sorry, I see your face. Okay.
No, it's an excellent question. We're going to cover it, but it's an excellent question. The short answer is, Dora, anything of value. Dora, if you got a penny, right? You helped your friend buy a house and they looked at you and they said, Dora, you did such a great job. Here's a penny for your troubles. Oof, you just committed illegal brokerage activity, Dora. Anything of value. There is no exception for $1. There's no exception if it's your bestie for the restie. There's no exception for Nana, okay? Real property for others for compensation. Needs a license. So here's these three pieces together, folks. Real property for others for compensation. Every single test question that gets to you in regard to this, you have to play it out in your head. Is it an LL Beans activity? And of that, is it dealing with real property for others for compensation? Let me explain why this is important. Folks, if you wanted to help your friend sell their car, you don't need a license for that. That doesn't fall under real estate law. It's a car. But because we have this special category of real estate law and brokerage, real estate brokerage, if it deals with real estate, and we're going to talk more in just a second about this term real estate, real property, land from a basic real estate concept point of view. But if the answer is, yeah, it deals with real property for somebody other than yourself and there's payment involved, you need a license. Now let me make a very powerful statement that is also going to be extremely testable. This includes referrals. So, if Justin was to call me tomorrow morning and he said, Seth, hey man, I really enjoyed night one of class. Listen, I've got a friend who's looking to buy a house and I want you to help him. I said, great, Justin, I'd be happy to. And Justin says, well, since you're going to make a big old fat check from helping my friend buy a house, would you send me some money as a kickback or a referral fee? That would be illegal. Because what Justin did is he referred somebody to buy, so it's an LL Beans activity, and that person is buying real property. It's somebody other than Justin, and he got compensated for sending that referral. He would need a license to collect that compensation. Now, let me make another very important statement. Folks, what I'm teaching you in this class is the law. And let me help you understand something to not get confused. If you get in your car tomorrow and you start traveling somewhere and you see that the speed limit in the area you're traveling is 55 miles per hour, have any of you fine folks ever gone faster than 55 miles per hour in that area? Some of y'all were honest and some of y'all were liar, liar, pants on fires, right? Listen to me, folks. If you've gone faster than the speed limit, you are a criminal. You have broken the law. Now, are they going to throw you away, throw you in jail and throw away the key? No. But it is breaking the law. And so that's what you have to understand about this class. I'm teaching you the law. Do people break the law all day, every day? Yes. This is why you can't think about your personal life. Folks, I bet that some of you have probably sent business to a real estate friend in the past and you got something like a bottle of wine, a gift card, or something like that. It was illegal for them to send that to you. Justin's smiling. What'd you get? Justin, was a bottle of wine? What'd you get? Steak dinner?
I plead the fifth.
Yeah, that's right. You listen, I'll use that reference in this class too. There's a couple times when we play the old school Chappelle show, right? I plead the fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not telling you nothing. 5. Yeah, not saying that. Yeah, it's all right, Justin. You don't got to self-incriminate. Remember, I'm not the law here, so you don't got to tell me nothing. Folks, do you see what I mean though? Just because you've seen it happen doesn't mean you should ever answer a test question that way. You've got to listen to what I say. That's what you're going to be tested on. Not what you've experienced. Not what you've seen. What I say. So if you have gotten a gift card from somebody, a bottle of wine, a cheese tray for sending them business, you've accepted illegal brokerage compensation because a referral fee requires a license.
In said situation, which party is breaking the law?
Both.
The realtor or the average citizen?
Both. It would be illegal brokerage activity to pay somebody who's not licensed. It would be illegal brokerage activity to accept money from somebody if you're not licensed. Both. Both could be held liable and accountable and be subject to disciplinary action. Now, of course, A real estate broker, you're going to find out as we get into this, is subject to disciplinary action by the Real Estate Commission. And there's a couple different sanctions that can happen to us as licensees. If you are an unlicensed person doing things illegally, folks, it is actually a Class 1 misdemeanor. It's criminal law when you violate license law. And so they will typically send you a cease and desist letter first, and if you continue, they would get turned over to the Attorney General for prosecution. But it is criminal law, just not one that's typically gone after.